The price of silence, the tragedy of Tamar and the scars. Silence left behind. What is the true price of silence? Not that silence which brings peace to the heart, which calms the soul and allows us to contemplate the beauty of life. No. I speak of that silence which hides deep wounds, which masks painful truths, and which, little by little, like corrosive acid, destroys entire families from within, leaving only ruins where once there was love and trust. Today I will tell you a story that goes far, beyond the sacred books. A story about how even the man considered after God's own heart failed terribly as a father. A story about how power, omission, and fear can transform a palace into a prison and a home into a battlefield. Imagine a young and virtuous princess walking through the corridors of the royal palace. Her steps echo on the cold stones as she makes her way to her half-brother's room, carrying with her only kindness, innocence, and the willingness to care for someone she believes to be ill. Her heart is pure. Her intentions are noble. She does not know that she is about to experience a nightmare that will change her life forever, robbing her not only of her dignity, but also of her voice, her future, and her hope. And the most shocking part? The deafening silence of the one who should protect her. The silence of a king. The silence of a father. The silence that speaks louder than any scream. To understand the magnitude of this family tragedy, we must first turn our eyes to Jerusalem, approximately 1,000 years before Christ. There, at the highest point of the city, stands the royal palace, where David lives, the greatest king Israel had ever known. A man who conquered kingdoms, defeated giants, unified a nation, and composed psalms that to this day touch hearts and cross millennia. But this is not a story about his victories. It is about his greatest defeat. A defeat that did not happen on battlefields, but within the walls of his own house. A defeat that was not inflicted by enemy armies, but by the silence of a father who did not know how to protect his daughter. The empire David built, and the family. He neglected David built an impressive empire. His military conquests expanded Israel's borders as never before. His kingdom flourished in peace and prosperity. His name was synonymous with wisdom, justice, and fear of God. Neighboring peoples respected him, his alliances were strong, and his influence extended from Damascus to Egypt. But within the palace walls, a complex and dangerous dynamic silently unfolded. With several wives and concubines, a common practice among monarchs of the time but no less problematic for it, David had an extensive family, with sons and daughters from different mothers. Imagine the atmosphere. Corridors where half-siblings grew up together, each carrying not only the burden of being the king's child, but also the expectations, ambitions, and rivalries of their respective mothers. Each woman wanted to see her son on the throne. Each child learned from an early age that life in the palace was an arena of silent disputes. Among his children was Amnon, the firstborn, accustomed from the cradle to having his desires fulfilled and occupying the prominent place in the line of succession to the throne. There was also Absalom, known for his stunning beauty, his magnetic charisma, and his long hair that was his pride. And there was Tamar, his sister, a young princess of generous heart, whose life was about to be destroyed by a web of events that her own father could have, and should have, prevented. What makes this story particularly relevant to us today is not just the dramatic events that compose it, but the timeless lessons about family leadership it offers. When we examine the events that led to Tamar's tragedy, we find patterns of behavior and warning signs that continue to repeat themselves in modern families, regardless of social class, culture, or religion. How can a leader be so perceptive in matters of state, so wise in judging complex causes, so sensitive in composing psalms that express the deepest human emotions, and at the same time be so blind to the dangerous dynamics within his own house? How can a father who wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd," become mute before his daughter's suffering? And more importantly, what can we learn from these errors to protect our own families? Now we will unravel not only the events that led to the destruction of David's family peace, but also identify 3 crucial signs that every father and mother need to know to avoid similar tragedies. Because although times have changed, the family dynamics that can lead to disaster remain frighteningly similar. This is a story about power, betrayal, and consequences. But above all, it is a warning about how the silence of those who should protect can become a weapon more devastating than any act of violence. The Palace of Shadows, the setting of the tragedy. As recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 3, David's rise to the throne was marked not only by military conquests but also by the expansion of his family. In Hebron, he fathered 6 sons from different women: Amnon by Ahinoam, Chileab by Abigail, Absalom by Maacah, Adonijah by Haggith, Shephatiah by Abital, and Ithream by Eglah. Later in Jerusalem, his family continued to grow, with the birth of more sons, including Solomon, by Bathsheba. The atmosphere of the royal palace was a reflection of this family, complexity. Imagine great stone halls adorned with tapestries and gold, where brothers and half-brothers grew up together, each carrying not only the burden of being the king's son, but also the expectations and ambitions of their respective mothers. The corridors echoed with whispers of palace intrigues, secret alliances, and silent rivalries. The scriptures show us, in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1, that in the midst of this environment, Absalom the son of David had a beautiful sister, whose name was Tamar, and after a time Amnon, David's son, loved her. But this was not a pure love, the kind that elevates the soul. It was a sick obsession, a forbidden desire that consumed his thoughts day and night. Before the tragedy that would change everything, life in the palace followed an apparently normal routine. David divided his time between the responsibilities of the kingdom and his large family. The scriptures show us a man who had conquered practically everything he desired. His kingdom extended from Dan to Beersheba, according to 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 10, an expression that indicated all the territory of Israel, from north to south. Peace reigned at the borders, the economy prospered, and David's name was respected among the nations. But behind this facade of prosperity and power, subtle signs of trouble began to appear. Like invisible cracks in the foundations of a great building, silent problems grew in the shadows. The first sign was in the family structure itself. With so many children from different mothers, rivalries and jealousies were inevitable. Each prince had his own entourage, his own supporters, and naturally, his own ambitions. Amnon, as firstborn, occupied a special position. The scriptures show that he had privileged access to the palace, considerable influence over the servants, and the unquestioning trust of his father. Absalom, in turn, already demonstrated the characteristics that would later make him a dangerous rebel: magnetic charisma, unbridled ambition, strategic patience, and a strong sense of personal justice that easily became confused with vengeance. He observed everything, learned from everyone, and waited for the right moment to act. Between them, Tamar lived protected, as was customary with the virgins of the royal house. Her life passed in the female quarters of the palace, learning domestic arts, the traditions of her people, and the law of Moses. She was described as beautiful, but she was also known for her virtuous character and obedience. A crucial character in this story, mentioned in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 3, is Jonadab, David's nephew and Amnon's close friend, described as a very crafty man. He would be the catalyst that would transform an already tense situation into an irreversible tragedy. His presence at court and his proximity to Amnon demonstrate how ill-intentioned people can exploit vulnerable family structures, offering advice that seems like solutions but are, in truth, deadly traps. What makes this situation even more tragic is that all the elements that would lead to disaster were visible to anyone who wanted to see. The isolation of the children in their own groups, the lack of close paternal supervision, the absence of open dialogue about feelings and desires, and the presence of questionable advisors. As it is written in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 3, "The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it." David, busy with the affairs of the kingdom and perhaps too confident in the apparent harmony of his house, did not notice how relationships among his children were silently deteriorating. The same man who had spiritual discernment to compose psalms of repentance and praise, the same leader who possessed wisdom to judge the most complex matters of the kingdom, was losing sight of the dangerous dynamics under his own roof. The shepherd who guided an entire nation neglected the flock within his own house. The scriptures teach us in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 to 7, that parents should diligently teach their children, talking of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. But amid the demands of the kingdom and the complexity of his family, David seemed to have lost sight of this fundamental responsibility. The king of Israel, so attentive to the voices of the prophets and the counsel of his generals, became deaf to the whispers that announced the approaching storm. The stage was set for a tragedy that would not only destroy the life of an innocent young woman, but also unleash a series of events that would shake the entire kingdom. And it all began with something seemingly simple, a look of lust and a malicious counsel. The conspiracy of silence, Amnon's plan. The narrative takes a dark turn when the scriptures reveal, in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 2, that Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar. This was not brotherly love. It was not that pure affection that exists between siblings. It was a sick obsession that consumed him physically and emotionally, turning his days into torture and his nights into nightmares of forbidden desire. As the king's firstborn, Amnon was accustomed to having his desires fulfilled. If he wanted a horse, he received the best from the royal stables. If he desired a property, it was granted to him. If he aspired to a position, it was promised to him. But this time, the object of his desire was forbidden by the most sacred laws of Israel, his own half-sister. The law of Moses was clear about the abomination of incestuous relationships, and Amnon knew this. But knowing was not enough to control the storm that roared in his chest. The situation worsens when Jonadab enters the scene. Described in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 3 as a very crafty man, he represents that dangerous figure we encounter in all spheres of life. The counselor who, instead of pointing out the right path, offers shortcuts to sin. Seeing his friend wasting away physically and emotionally, Jonadab approaches with an apparently innocent question. "Why are you, the king's son, so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" 2 Samuel 13:4. This question, which could have been the beginning of wise and redemptive counsel, would open the doors to one of the most perverse plans recorded in the sacred scriptures. Here we see how manipulative people can transform complex situations into irreversible tragedies. Instead of advising Amnon to abandon his impure thoughts, to seek spiritual help, to flee from temptation, Jonadab devises a diabolical plan. He suggests, "Go to your bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat.'" 2 Samuel 13:5. The plan was as simple as it was cruel, taking advantage of the customs of the time, when it was common for the women of the family to care for the sick. Preparing food and administering home remedies, Jonadab created the perfect trap. He knew that neither David nor Tamar would suspect ill intentions in an apparently innocent request from a sick brother. Tamar's kindness would be the bait, David's trust the entry door, and Amnon's obsession the engine of the tragedy. The execution of the plan reveals how much Amnon had corrupted himself inwardly. He did not hesitate to lie to his father, manipulate his sister, and abuse family trust. The scriptures show in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 6, how he feigned his illness. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, "I would like my sister Tamar to come and make 2 cakes in my sight, so that I may eat from her hand." The request sounded natural to David's ears. After all, Who would suspect malice in a brother wanting to be cared for by his sister? Who would imagine that behind the apparent fragility hid the brute force of violence? Who could predict that the sickbed would transform into a crime scene? This is one of the most painful moments of the narrative, as we see how a father's innocence can inadvertently place his children in danger. David, without knowing, became an involuntary accomplice to the perverse plan. His natural trust in his children, which should have been a virtue, became exploited vulnerability. In his wisdom, the book of Proverbs, chapter 27 verse 12 warns us, "The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it." In this case, all the signs of danger were present, but were ignored. Amnon's sick obsession, which had lasted long enough to make him ill, the suspicious counsel of Jonadab, known for his craftiness, the unusual request for specific care from Tamar, and the very nature of Amnon's desire, which violated the most fundamental laws of Israel. Amnon's plan was not merely to satisfy a forbidden desire. It was about power, control, and the perversion of the most sacred family bonds. He used his position as firstborn, his father's trust, and his sister's kindness to create a situation where he could realize his darkest intentions with the involuntary connivance of everyone. While Tamar, innocent and obedient, made her way to her brother's quarters to care for him, perhaps carrying in her hands the ingredients for the cakes she would prepare, her heart pulsed with the simple joy of serving. She did not know she was walking toward the abyss. She could not imagine that that act of kindness would be the last act of freedom in her life. She could not foresee that, upon crossing the door of Amnon's quarters, she would be entering a prison from which she would never leave, as it is written in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 26. "And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her." The muffled scream, the violence against Tamar. What happens next is recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 13, with a painful clarity that crosses the centuries as an eternal testimony to human cruelty. When Tamar arrives at Amnon's quarters, she finds her brother apparently ill, lying on his bed, surrounded by the complicit silence of the servants who had been instructed to withdraw. With fraternal devotion, she goes to the place where she is to prepare the food. Her skillful hands mix the flour, knead the dough, shape the cakes before his eyes, or rather, before Amnon's eyes, who watches her with a look she interprets as the tiredness of sickness, but which is actually the predator's fixation. She demonstrates all the care a devoted sister could have. There is no haste in her movements, no distrust in her heart. She is just a young woman caring for her sick brother, fulfilling a sacred family duty. But then, the mask falls. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." 2 Samuel 13:11. In that terrible moment, Tamar realizes the trap she has fallen into. The shock must have been like a physical blow. The familiar face of her brother transforms into something monstrous. The security of the palace dissolves. Trust shatters into 1,000 pieces. Her immediate response reveals not only her character, but also her knowledge of the law and her intelligence in a situation of extreme danger. She does not remain silent. She fights. She argues. "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing." 2 Samuel 13:12. Tamar appeals to what is most sacred in her culture: God's law, Israel's identity as a holy people, the difference between pagan nations and the people of the covenant. She is saying, "Remember who we are. Remember who you are. We are not like other peoples who practice such abominations. We have the law of the Lord. We have a covenant with God." She continues, trying to find a way out, any way out. "As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." 2 Samuel 13:13. In this desperate attempt, Tamar shows not only her purity, but also her wisdom. She suggests a legitimate path, that Amnon speak to the king, that he ask for her hand according to the possibilities of the time. Although the law prohibited relations with a half-sister, she appeals to any alternative that might save her from imminent violence. It is the cry of someone about to be thrown into the abyss, clinging to any thread of hope. But Amnon, consumed by his obsession, would not listen to her voice. The desire that had consumed him for so long now completely blinded him. There was no argument that would stop him, no appeal that would move him, no law that would restrain him. But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. 2 Samuel 13:14. The violence of this act is further amplified by what happens next. The scriptures reveal something shocking about the psychology of the aggressor. Immediately after the attack, Amnon's supposed love transforms into violent hatred. Then Amnon hated her with very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up and go." 2 Samuel 13:15. This instantaneous transformation of desire into repulsion, of passion into contempt, reveals the true nature of Amnon's obsession. It was not love, it never was. It was possession, it was desire for power. It was the satisfaction of a selfish impulse that, once satiated, leaves only emptiness and disgust. Tamar, still in shock, attempts one more appeal. "No, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me." 2 Samuel 13:16. She understands that expulsion makes the crime even worse. In the context of the time, a violated and rejected woman would have no social protection, no possibility of marriage, no dignified future. Amnon, by expelling her, was condemning her to a life of isolation and shame, but he would not listen to her. Calling his servant, he ordered, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." 2 Samuel 13:17. The words are cruelly dehumanizing. This woman, as if she were not a person, as if she were not his sister, as if she were not a princess of Israel. The servant obeys, and Tamar is cast out, the door closing behind her with the definitive sound of a sepulchral seal. In one last act of expressing her pain, Tamar, devastated, put ashes on her head and tore the long robe she wore, and she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. 2 Samuel 13:19. Her act of tearing her garments and covering herself with ashes was a public sign of mourning and tragedy in the culture of the time. The long robe of many colors was probably a symbol of her position as the king's daughter, perhaps a gift from her father, indicating her special status. By tearing it, she announced to everyone she encountered in the palace corridors that her life had been destroyed. Her hands on her head and her crying were the physical expression of a crushed soul. And here we arrive at the moment that gives title to this story. David's silence. The silence that screams. The king's omission. When the news reaches David's ears, the scriptures tell us that when King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. 2 Samuel 13:21. Anger, an appropriate, human, understandable reaction. Faced with the violation of his daughter, the perversion of his family, the breaking of all divine and human laws, David becomes angry. Blood boils in his veins. Injustice cries out for justice. But what follows is even more revealing and tragic than the violence itself. Silence. No action, no investigation, no punishment, no word of comfort for Tamar, no pursuit of justice, no protection for his violated daughter. David's anger, which should have been the fuel for action, dissipates like smoke, leaving only the emptiness of omission. Why did David remain silent? This question echoes through the centuries, and scholars offer various possibilities. Some suggest that David may have felt paralyzed by his own past guilt, remembering his sin with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. Who was he to judge his son's sexual sin when he himself had committed adultery and homicide. Perhaps his accusing heart silenced him, making him feel disqualified to exercise justice. Others argued that he was caught between his role as king and as father. Amnon was his firstborn, the heir to the throne, the son in whom he placed so many hopes. Punishing him would be complicated, would bring public scandal, would further divide the family, would affect the succession. Perhaps David made a political calculation. The price of justice for Tamar was too high for the kingdom. There are also those who point to David's pattern as a father. In 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 6, referring to another of his sons, Adonijah, the scriptures tell us that his father had never at any time displeased him by asking, "Why have you done thus and so?" This pattern of not confronting, not disciplining, of allowing children to follow their own paths, seems to have been a constant characteristic in David's fatherhood. But regardless of the reasons, the result was devastating. A destroyed daughter, an unpunished criminal, and seeds of vengeance being planted in the heart of Absalom, Tamar's brother. David's silence echoes through the centuries as a solemn warning to all parents, to all authorities, to all who have the power to protect the vulnerable. When those who have authority and responsibility choose not to act in the face of injustice, especially within their own families, the consequences are devastating and far-reaching. Tamar lived as a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house, 2 Samuel 13:20. Her life, once full of promise and possibility, was reduced to an existence of isolation and trauma. The palace that should have been her refuge became the setting of her nightmare. And the father who should have been her protector became complicit through his silence. This silence not only failed to bring justice to Tamar, but also planted the seeds for an even greater tragedy. As it is written in Ecclesiastes chapter 8 verse 11, "Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil." Silence has a price, and in the case of David's family, that price would be exacted with very high interest. The seed of vengeance, Absalom's plan. 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 22 reveals that Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. This silence, however, was different from David's passive silence. Absalom's silence was calculated, strategic, deadly. It was the silence that precedes the storm, the calm before the hurricane, the predator's crouch before the strike. For 2 whole years, Absalom kept his hatred in his heart, feeding it day after day as one feeds a flame with wood. Every time he saw Amnon in the palace corridors, every time he heard his name, every time he thought of his desolate sister in his house, the hatred grew more and more. He said nothing, but his heart was a seething cauldron of resentment. The scriptures show how he meticulously planned his revenge, waiting for the perfect moment, the ideal occasion, the opportunity that would not raise suspicion. The biblical text highlights that, after 2 full years, 2 Samuel 13:23, Absalom finally put his plan into action. Absalom's plan was as cunning as Amnon's had been, but with a different purpose, not the satisfaction of a desire, but the execution of vengeance. He organized a sheep-shearing festival at Baal-Hazor, near the territory of Ephraim. Sheep-shearing was an event traditionally celebrated with great banquets, flowing with much wine and food, an occasion of joy and festivity. As recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 24, Absalom invited all the king's sons, including David himself, although he knew that the king would probably not attend an event so far from the capital. When David hesitated to allow Amnon to go to the feast, Absalom insisted specifically on the presence of his older brother. "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." 2 Samuel 13:26. The request was apparently innocent. What harm could there be in a brother wanting another brother's company at a feast? But it carried a death sentence. David, perhaps relieved not to have to deal directly with the tense situation between the brothers, perhaps hopeful that time had healed the wounds, consented. During the banquet, when Amnon's heart was merry with wine, 2 Samuel 13:28, Absalom gave the signal to his servants. The order was clear and deadly. Strike Amnon and kill him. Do not fear. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. 2 Samuel 13:28. The moment of vengeance had arrived. The execution was swift and brutal. Absalom's servants surrounded Amnon and killed him right there at the banquet table, transforming celebration into mourning, joy into terror. The other sons of the king, fearing for their own lives, mounted their mules and fled. 2 Samuel 13:29. Panic took hold of them. If Absalom had killed one brother, who would be next? The news that first reached David was even worse than reality. Absalom has struck down all the king's sons and not one of them is left. 2 Samuel 13:30. At this moment we see again how bad news travels quickly, but not always with accuracy. The rumor, like fire in dry grass, spread before the facts could be verified. Jonadab, the same who had advised Amnon in his perverse plan years before, now appears again to calm the king. Do not let my lord the king take it to heart that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead. 2 Samuel 13:32. It is ironic and tragic that the same counselor who helped orchestrate the first crime is now the bearer of good news about the second. David's reaction to Amnon's death shows a father torn between love for his children and the consequences of his own previous silence. The scriptures tell us that the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, 2 Samuel 13:31. The pain was real, the mourning was genuine, the suffering was deep, but it was also too late. The cycle of violence and silence, however, was far from over. Absalom fled to Geshur, where he remained exiled for 3 years. During this time, as 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 39 tells us, the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon, since he was dead. A father's heart, even in the face of tragedy and fratricide, still yearned for his son. Paternal love, which should have protected Tamar and disciplined Amnon, now manifested as longing for the murderer. The complexity of human emotions is portrayed with impressive honesty in the scriptures. This sequence of events shows us how violence begets violence, and how silence in the face of injustice can lead to even more devastating consequences. As it is written in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7, do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. The price of David's initial silence in the face of Tamar's rape now multiplied. A destroyed daughter, a murdered son, another son exiled, and a royal family in shambles. And yet, the consequences would continue to unfold. Absalom's return from exile, his partial reconciliation with David, his conspiracy to take the throne, the civil war that followed, and the tragic death of Absalom himself. All of this had its roots in that crucial moment when David chose silence over action, omission over justice, passivity over protection. The price of omission. Lessons for today. To fully understand the impact of this family tragedy, we need to analyze the crucial leadership errors that David committed as a father. The same man who demonstrated extraordinary courage before Goliath, when he faced the giant with only a sling and 5 smooth stones. The same man who demonstrated exceptional wisdom in governing Israel, unifying the tribes and establishing Jerusalem as the capital. The same man who demonstrated spiritual sensitivity in composing psalms that express the deepest human emotions. That same man failed at critical moments when his family most needed him. The first fundamental error was lack of vigilance. As an experienced leader, David should have recognized the signs of danger. In 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 7, we learn that the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Irony of ironies. David, a man chosen by God precisely for his ability to see beyond appearances, failed to see the dark intentions within his own house. The signs were all there. Amnon's obsession, which made him waste away day after day. the dangerous influence of Jonadab, known for his craftiness, the growing isolation among the brothers, the lack of genuine communication. But David was too busy with the kingdom, too distracted by the demands of the throne, too unaware of the emotional dynamics of his children. The second error was paralysis in the face of crisis. When evil was committed against Tamar, the scriptures tell us that David was angry, but did not act. This inaction is particularly significant when we consider that, as king, he had all the power necessary to do justice. He could have convened a court, heard witnesses, punished the guilty. He could have provided counseling for Tamar, guaranteed her future, restored her dignity, as much as possible. He could have at the very least gone to her, embraced his daughter, wept with her, told her he loved her, and would fight for her. In Proverbs chapter 21 verse 15, it is written, "When justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers." David failed in his role both as father and as constituted authority. His anger, without corresponding action, became nothing more than empty emotion. The third error, perhaps the most devastating, was allowing his past to compromise his present. Some scholars suggest that David may have felt disqualified to punish Amnon because of his own sin with Bathsheba. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 10 to 11, the prophet Nathan had prophesied that the sword shall never depart from your house as a consequence of his actions. However, this prophecy was not an excuse for inaction, but a warning that should have made him more vigilant, more careful, more proactive in protecting his family. David's past sin did not exempt him from his present responsibility. On the contrary, it should have made him more sensitive to the gravity of sin, more aware of the need for justice, more determined to break the cycle of violence that now threatened his house. The fourth error was the pattern of avoiding necessary conflicts. In 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 6, referring to another of his sons, Adonijah, the scriptures tell us that his father had never at any time displeased him by asking, "Why have you done thus, and so?" This pattern of not confronting evil within the house, of not establishing clear boundaries, of not applying discipline when necessary, had devastating consequences. David's passive leadership created a vacuum of authority that was filled by violence and vengeance. In Ecclesiastes chapter 8 verse 11, we are warned, "Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil." David's silence in the face of Amnon's crime essentially authorized Absalom to take justice into his own hands. The fifth error, more subtle but equally significant, was the failure to create an environment of open and safe communication in his family. When Tamar was attacked, she did not find in her father a safe harbor to seek justice. When Absalom was planning revenge, there was no dialogue that could prevent more violence. Anger, hurt, resentment, everything remained hidden, fermenting in silence, until it exploded in destruction, as it is written in Proverbs chapter 29 verse 15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. The absence of loving and consistent discipline, of present and attentive guidance, of open and safe communication, created an environment where David's children followed their own paths, often destructive ones. These leadership errors are not merely historical lessons. They are relevant warnings for all who occupy positions of authority, especially within the family. When those who should protect and guide choose the path of silence and passivity, the consequences can echo for generations. Breaking the silence. Paths to healing and protection. What can we learn from this ancient family tragedy that still resonates so strongly in our days? The lessons are profound and urgently relevant for modern families, regardless of their social position or cultural context. The first crucial lesson is about the importance of active vigilance. As 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 8 warns us, be sober-minded, be watchful. In today's world, where our children and young people face often invisible threats through social media, digital relationships, peer pressure, exposure to inappropriate content, this vigilance becomes even more crucial. This is not about obsessive control, invasion of privacy, or paranoid distrust. It is about attentive presence and genuine interest in our children's lives, knowing their friends, their interests, their struggles. Perceiving sudden changes in behavior, unusual isolation, tense or inappropriate relationships. Being attentive to questionable influences in their social circle. The warning signs that David ignored have their modern equivalents. The teenager who spends hours locked in their room, the young person who avoids eye contact, the child who becomes aggressive or withdrawn without explanation, friendships that seem to exert negative influence. Being vigilant is being present. The second fundamental lesson is about the need for immediate action in situations of abuse. David's silence after the violence against Tamar teaches us that inaction in the face of evil is, in itself, a form of complicity. As it is written in James chapter 4, verse 17, "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." Today, this means creating open channels of communication in the family, where children know they can talk about any subject without fear of judgment or punishment. It means establishing clear and consistent boundaries regarding relationships and behaviors. It means acting promptly when abuse is suspected, seeking the appropriate authorities, professional support, and immediate protection for the victim. It also means believing in the words of our children. Tamar spoke, but her voice was not enough to move her father to action. How many children and young people today speak and are not heard? How many silences are imposed by the fear of not being believed? The third lesson deals with the importance of breaking cycles of violence. The tragedy of David's family unfolded in a growing spiral, from inappropriate desire to sexual violence, from silence to deadly vengeance, from murder to civil war. In Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 to 8, we are reminded that whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For modern families, this implies identifying and treating toxic relationship patterns before they become crises. It means seeking peaceful conflict, resolution, promoting forgiveness without neglecting justice, creating safe environments for expressing feelings, including anger, hurt, and resentment, which when repressed only grow. It also means recognizing that violence is not only physical. Psychological violence, emotional manipulation, abuse of power, affective neglect, all these forms of violence leave deep marks and can generate new cycles of destruction. The fourth lesson is about the need for active and present leadership. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6 instructs us, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." This instruction requires presence, involvement, and consistent example. It is not something that can be delegated to schools, churches, or babysitters. It is the primary responsibility of parents. In current practice, this means actively participating in children's lives, being at meals, accompanying school activities, knowing their friends, demonstrating values through actions, not just words. It means creating regular moments of family connection, conversations at the table, outings together, shared projects. It means being available in times of crisis, but also in the ordinary moments of daily life. For it is in the small moments that trust is built for the great challenges. The fifth lesson, which synthesizes all the others, is about the importance of breaking the silence. Fear, shame, the desire to maintain appearances, the false idea that what happens in the family stays in the family, the culture of not airing dirty laundry. All of this contributes to the silence that protects aggressors and abandons victims. As it is written in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." Condemning the works of darkness means bringing them to light, exposing them, confronting them. It means creating an environment where difficult truths can be spoken without fear of retaliation. For today's families, this means establishing networks of support and protection, not fearing to seek external help when necessary, whether from counselors, therapists, spiritual leaders, or authorities. It means prioritizing the safety and well-being of the vulnerable above family reputation, above the appearance of harmony, above the discomfort of facing the truth. Transforming lessons into action, practical steps for modern families. How can we transform these lessons into concrete actions to protect and strengthen our families? Here are practical and immediate steps that can be implemented. First, establish regular moments of family dialogue. Do not wait for problems to appear to create spaces for communication. Do as Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7 guides us. Talking of these things, when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Create family rituals, meals together without electronic distractions, moments of conversation before bed, outings where dialogue flows naturally. Second, educate about boundaries and consent. From an early age, teach children about their bodies, about what is appropriate or not in physical contact, about their right to say no even to adults. Talk about consent in an age-appropriate manner. Create a family vocabulary to discuss these topics without embarrassment. Third, know your children's circle of influence. Know who the friends, teachers, group leaders that your children frequent are. Be attentive to relationships that seem secret or inappropriate. Get to know the families of friends. Be present in the environments your children frequent. Fourth, create a family safety plan. This includes establishing clear rules about internet and social media use, creating safety passwords for dangerous situations, keeping emergency contacts always updated, teaching children to seek help in situations of discomfort or fear. Fifth, seek preventive professional support. Just as we consult doctors for regular checkups, having a family counselor or therapist can help identify and treat problems before they become crises. Do not wait for tragedy to happen to seek help. Sixth, strengthen family bonds through shared activities. Regular family meals, moments of prayer or reflection together, celebrations of achievements and family milestones, projects that involve everyone's participation. All of this creates connections that protect and strengthen. Seventh, be a safe harbor. Cultivate an environment where your children know they can tell you anything without fear of disproportionate reactions. If they made mistakes, they need guidance, not condemnation. If they suffered, they need comfort, not judgment. If they are confused, they need listening, not ready-made answers. Eighth, break the cycle of silence in your own history. Many of us carry wounds from our own upbringing, dysfunctional patterns we learned in our families of origin. Recognizing these patterns, seeking healing for these wounds is fundamental to not repeating them with our children. The choice before us, the story of Tamar, Amnon, Absalom, and David is not merely a historical account. It is a mirror that reflects challenges that many families face to this day. The silence that destroyed this royal family continues to be a real threat to contemporary homes. The omission that allowed violence against a princess of Israel still permits violence against children and young people in our days. But unlike Tamar, we do not need to carry our ashes in solitude. Unlike David, we do not need to allow our past to paralyze our actions in the present. Unlike Amnon and Absalom, we do not need to let destructive impulses determine the destiny of our families. As it is written in Isaiah chapter 61 verse 3, the Lord promises to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit. This promise of restoration is available to all families who choose to break the cycle of silence and omission. The choice is before us. We can be like David, who fell silent before evil, or we can be agents of change and protection in our families. We can repeat the mistakes of the past or learn from them. We can perpetuate cycles of violence or break them with courage and determination. The price of silence is too high to be ignored. A destroyed daughter, a murdered son, another son exiled, a divided nation, a stained legacy. All because a father chose silence over action, omission over justice, passivity over protection. It is time to speak. It is time to act. It is time to protect. Because sometimes breaking the silence is the first step to restoring peace, and protecting the vulnerable is the most sacred of responsibilities. May we learn from David's mistakes. May we be vigilant, present, courageous parents and mothers. May we create homes where love is not just a word, but action. Where justice is not just an ideal but practice. Where silence does not hide wounds but gives way to healing. May God give us wisdom to see beyond appearances, courage to act in the face of injustice, and love to protect those entrusted to us. Amen.